Morning. Thank you for tuning in to Hobby Hi-Fi. I'm on a roll this morning. It's the first day of 2025. I just took a video on Cambridge Audio S30 speakers. And while I'm posting that, I thought I would grab my other phone and make another video about a product and a situation that arose that I thought I would try to give you some hints to my methodology and why I do this and how I do it. I think I'll probably call this something like finding stuff. So what I do is I operate mostly in the budget realm, which means I don't have a whole lot of disposable cash to be able to kick out. And so I do a lot of looking on things like Craigslist and eBay. And you know, back in the day, there used to be a lot of things that you could find at your local Goodwill. There's my Alexa, stop timer. I think that means my video is done uploading. So, excuse the interruption. I wanted to just talk a bit about what I do as far as finding stuff. And so typically I'll scour the local area. You know, Facebook Marketplace is an opportunity to find some old stereo goods. You know, I really like some of this older equipment that was possibly made in the United States. A lot of these companies have either folded. A lot of them were out of Massachusetts, you know, the oldies but goodies, KLH and Acoustic Research and, you know, EPI. There was an awful lot of good products, specifically speakers that came out of the Northeast and namely in Massachusetts. And so amplifiers are a little bit different. They did make a few very nice amplifiers in the United States. B&K, and I believe Acurus here is another one that was manufactured in the United States. Now, I think these are still in business, but some of them have been bought out by different you know companies and sort of changed the way that they did business. And so, being an old school vintage guy, you know, I always look for some gems that I can pick up for a reasonable price and hopefully find that product that somebody else may have missed the boat on. And what I mean by that is when I take a look at an amp like this Acurus A-150 here, this is a 150 watt per channel amp, I believe. And it's built like a tank, and they're known for having a sort of an underappreciated sound and sort of a sleeper, I would say, in their own right. And so I happen to find this one on eBay, and you know, nowadays it's hard for me to find things on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and the Goodwills and whatnot. And so I used to have a lot of luck in those places, and it seems to be drying up a bit. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm assuming that a lot of these oldie but goodie products are filling our landfills, which is always sad to me. But anyway, this was a heck of an amp in its day, and so I thought I would try my luck. And what I mean by that is that when I go on eBay and I see something, I try to get a feel for whether or not who the seller is. Is the seller knowledgeable on the product? Does he know the little quirks? Does he know that the unit may actually be in good shape, but they're selling it as parts? They haven't maybe have the opportunity to test it properly, and they may have overlooked some simple facts, like the fact that in this case there's a fuse that's built into the back of this amp just over the a fuse holder that sort of clips in. This is a 6 amp fuse, a full size 6 by 30 millimeter, I believe is what they call the size for those full size fuses, glass fuse or ceramic. But this kind of clips into the back underneath the power cord receptacle, and a lot of people are not even privy to the fact that these fuses are there. So when they say the amp is dead, sometimes it's just a fuse, and so this is the area in which I operate. This is how I sort of find my my sleeping little beauties that are sitting on a shelf that somebody may think is the next places to drop it off at the dump, you know. And so I hate to see that happen, and so sometimes I will take a gamble. In this case, I dished out $150 for this amp, and I thought to myself, well, worst case scenario, I can just resell it as parts and make sure to pack it properly and get it to somebody that can diagnose circuitry and is way above my league when it comes to running complicated electronic devices like oscilloscopes and whatnot. And so I'm going to try to elevate my game by learning more about those types of diagnostic tools. But right now I don't have an oscilloscope, and that may have helped me to try to diagnose this. But so anyway, what I look for in these types of things is the item in good shape? And yes, it was. None of the corners it hasn't been abused. A lot of the fins, like on the back here, will be bent. Corners will be dinged. This one seemed like it was in very good shape. So I thought to myself, well, this is a possible chance. Maybe it's just a fuse, and there's other things to look for. The other thing that you can look for, some of these items, this has a rocker switch for a power switch here. And there's a little LED light on the front of the switch. And I wish I could give you a little bit better picture here, but what happens is that the little LED on that rocker switch will burn out. And so this is common to a lot of amps that run those types of rocker switches. Adcom has also the same type of power switch, and B&K is another one that has a funky rocker switch like that. And there's various other makers that have this type of rocker switch for a switch with a light on the front, and as soon as people plug it in and go and hit that switch and they don't see that light up, they think, oh, well, this thing is toast. But I've had these lights just burn out and the amp works fine. So you're assuming that the amp is not working when it actually is if you're not thoroughly testing these. So that was another reason why I decided to pick this amp up. And the third one is that there are internal fuses. So that once you get the cover off, you can check the internal fuses. Sometimes there's as much as 4 fuses, 2 for each channel, underneath the hood of these. And you might get lucky and find that your fuses, maybe the amp was shorted. Maybe somebody had touched their speaker wires. Maybe somebody had overdriven the amp to clipping and it had blown the fuses. Who knows, why fuses will blow. It's not always because the amp is defective, but sometimes it's just that there's been sort of an electrical burst, maybe even hit by lightning, things like that, electric surges and whatnot. And so with all these things combined, I decided to take a gamble on this. One thing that I didn't look closely enough, and the pictures are something that is very important when you're looking on eBay, is that there was only 3 screws included in the top cover in the whole amp actually. And this is one of those amps where there's probably a good dozen or more screws to hold this cover on. Well, all but missing were 3, and that was something that I didn't notice when I bought the amp, and I sort of kicked myself because that is another indicator that somebody has actually taken this amp apart and has been sort of irresponsible, which I have done. I don't want to point fingers, but when you take an amp apart and you've got a dozen screws, some of these screws are very specific. Some of them are meant to go with the amp, whether the screws are recessed, you know, whether it's a torque screw, whether it's a particular type of thread, and sometimes it's hard to find the screws. And so I was a little bit miffed when I got the amp and I realized that I was missing a dozen screws that I may not be able to find. In this case, I think they're pretty generic screws. They are just a regular Phillips small screw. Yeah, and so I popped the top, and sure enough, what did I see? A couple of wires on a, I'm assuming it's either the bridge or the rectifier. And again, you know, my knowledge is, when it comes to circuits, is not where it should be. So I'm going to try to elevate that knowledge in the coming year here, and try to elevate my game. But I noticed that a couple of wires had obviously been disconnected, and so whether or not that was that happened in testing, or in packing or shipping, you know, sometimes I've had wires come disconnected just because it was mishandled or handled too roughly in shipping. And you find that some of your wires just have come unplugged, and when you plug them back in, everything works fine. And so stranger things have happened. In this case, it didn't solve my problem. All the fuses were intact underneath. This fuse here on the back panel was blown. It looked like somebody had, now that was a 6 amp fuse, slow blow, and I didn't happen to have any 6 amp slow blow, so I had a 5, and I thought I would put that in there, and that immediately also, when I plugged it in, it blew that fuse. So then I realized that I may be in trouble here. So I wasn't able, I will get some of the correct fuses in. I'll try to see if I can find some 6 amp slow blows, and I will try this again. But I think what has happened is that possibly one of the capacitors inside, there's some extremely large caps in here. There's a nice round toroidal transformer, and a pretty simple layout as far as the board is concerned, except for the transistors are mounted on on sort of a vertical mounted board, where it's probably going to need to come out to be able to get at all the connections. And sometimes it is just a cold solder joint. That's something that I can generally handle. When you see something that has maybe some cracks, it has been mishandled, or maybe just old, maybe the solder job that day wasn't going very well. You know, you may see some places where you can touch up with a little extra solder, reflow some of those joints, and get some magic back in some of these nice old pieces. But I have to think that for the most part, I think that this one is over my head, and there's probably some dried up capacitors, some things, some pieces and parts that have reached the end of their life. And to be able to diagnose those properly, I'm not quite sure just an ohm meter or a multimeter is going to do the trick. And so being able to test a capacitor out, and like I say, the capacitors in this amp are a good, you know, 3-4 inches around, so they're a very large capacitor. So there's a lot of possibility for the capacitor to just need replacement. And to be able to test those capacitors, it's a bit tricky. First of all, you need to make sure that you have drained all the energy out of those capacitors, because you can get quite a jolt out of them. And you know, you can, I think, easily short out a capacitor just by bridging the positive and negative, but I haven't wanted to do that trick. I've seen people do it with sort of like when you're starting your car, by bridging your alternator with your starter, or by just jumping the leads on your starter rather. With a screwdriver, you'll get that snap of electricity there, and sometimes I don't like fooling with a lot of juice and bridging gaps any more than I like sticking my finger in a light socket or in a wall receptacle. You know, I'm a little bit careful and a little tentative sometimes about those types of things. So I'm going to have to try to elevate my game, or just resell this one as parts. But when I do resell this one, I'm probably going to let people know that it is blowing fuses, and that would have been nice for me to know. I probably would have not purchased the item had I thought that there was an internal issue. But with all the other factors that are possible on something like this, I thought I would take a gamble and see if maybe I could get this baby running without actually having to pull parts and test parts and replace parts and things that I may not be able to do technically right now without a good soldering station, without more circuitry knowledge than I have. And so I may also, since this is quite a piece, to just give it to somebody. There are a few only in this area, people that will repair electronics anymore, and some of them are hard to find. Some of them are very busy, and some of them are costly to deal with. And so, whether or not I wanted to just drop this off to somebody and say, well, see what you can do for a couple $100, and maybe I'll still have an amp that's definitely worth the $200 or $300 here. But anyway, I just thought I would let you in on some of my methodology and how I find things, and sometimes I get lucky, sometimes I don't, and in this case I did not, which is unfortunate because I have had one of these amps, and I think I had its big brother, the Acurus a-150 as well, which is another brute as far as an amp goes, and they sound fantastic, and they'll drive just about any speaker to mind-blowing levels, and in the 1 to 200 watt range. So anyway, that's about all I've got for you today, and I appreciate you listening. I just thought I would give you a heads up on how to find things, and what to look for, and some signs, some hacks, and some ideas about how we can possibly save some of these items from the landfills before they are gone. Because nowadays there's so many things made in China. I'm not quite sure whether the quality is the way it used to be, and things are getting lighter. And I always like a pair of speakers that weighs 100 pounds, because it was made with real wood and with serious components, and it was made to last. And a lot of these things can still be running 40 or 50 years later, which always blows my mind. Well, thank you for joining me on this rainy day here in Maine. At least it's not snowing. I suppose a lot of people would rather have it be snowing than raining, but it's a nice day for a duck. Thank you for watching, and I hope I've given you a little bit of information, something you might be able to use to help you find your own little hidden gems. Thanks again. Happy New Year.